Ever imagine a world where cars were still pulled by horses
Oh, yeah.
and trains chugged along on coal? That was the reality before oil, transformed our world.
Right.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into the prize. Daniel Yergin's Pulitzer Prize-winning epic about the history of oil.
Wow.
We've got some truly fascinating excerpts, and trust me, this stuff is way more captivating than you might think.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would think that oil's pretty boring.
Totally.
But
You'd be wrong.
Yergin makes it so interesting.
Absolutely.
What's really intriguing about the prize is that it goes beyond just the technicalities of oil. It's a story of human ambition, ingenuity,
Greed.
and sometimes even ruthlessness. Yeah, greed for sure.
Right.
It shows how this one resource, oil, has shaped global power-driven innovation and sparked conflicts.
Wars.
Literally reshaped maps. Wars, exactly.
Yeah, it's incredible.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. This seemingly simple substance has touched nearly every aspect of modern life.
I know, it's crazy. So where does this epic tale begin?
Well, picture this. The mid-1800s, rock oil, as it was called, was considered more of a nuisance than a treasure. It seeped into salt wells, contaminating the precious commodity. But then a few visionary individuals started to see potential in this smelly, sticky substance.
Okay, so we're talking about the early pioneers, right?
Yeah.
The folks who dared to dream of a world powered by oil.
Exactly. And these weren't your typical businessmen. Yergin introduces us to colorful characters like a court-martialed British admiral obsessed with asphalt, partnering with a Canadian doctor-turned-geologist who gave us the name kerosene.
What? Talk about an unlikely duo.
That's it.
They saw a future where oil could light up homes and streets, replacing whale oil and candles.
Wow, so we were using whale oil back then.
Yeah, can you imagine?
That's wild.
Yeah.
But it's not just about these eccentric visionaries, is it? Didn't someone actually figure out how to extract oil from the ground in large quantities? Ah, yes. Enter Edwin Drake.
Yeah.
This guy was a former railroad conductor who took a huge gamble drilling for oil in Pennsylvania. And here's where it gets really interesting. He almost missed his big break. Can you imagine being on the verge of shutting down the entire operation?
Oh my gosh.
After months of toil and then bam, you strike oil. Talk about a nail-biting moment.
I can't even imagine the relief mixed with elation.
Oh, yeah.
But this wasn't just a personal victory for Drake, right? His discovery ignited a frenzy, didn't it?
You got it. It was like the Wild West all over again. The first oil rush was on. And as you can imagine, things got pretty chaotic with everyone and their brother trying to get a piece of the black gold.
Oh, yeah.
It was a time of immense opportunity, but also cutthroat competition, wild speculation, and more than a few shady dealings.
Sounds like the perfect setting for a powerful figure to emerge and impose some order on this chaos.
Yeah.
I have a feeling I know who you're about to mention.
You're probably thinking of John D. Rockefeller, and you'd be right. Yergin paints a fascinating portrait of this meticulous and ambitious businessman who saw opportunity in this chaotic industry. Rockefeller wasn't just interested in drilling. He saw the bigger picture. He built an empire Standard Oil by consolidating smaller companies and revolutionizing the refining process, making kerosene safer and more affordable.
Right. I mean, it's one thing to get it out of the ground,
Right.
but then you have to make it usable.
Exactly.
Okay, so Rockefeller was clearly a brilliant businessman, but wasn't he also known for some, shall we say, aggressive tactics?
That's the intriguing part. Yergin doesn't shy away from the controversies surrounding Standard Oil.
Right.
He highlights how Rockefeller used his immense wealth and influence to control pipelines, undercut competitors, and even manipulate railroads to gain an advantage.
Wow.
It raises questions about the ethics of his methods, even as he built a company that brought light and fuel to millions.
Yeah. I mean, was he a robber baron or was he a visionary? Or both?
Right.
It's a complex legacy, for sure. On one hand, he was a ruthless businessman who crushed his rivals.
Right.
But on the other, he was a philanthropist who donated millions to education and social causes.
Right.
It makes you wonder if he was trying to polish his image
Right.
or genuinely believed in giving back to society.
Yeah, you never know.
Right.
That's the beauty of the prize. It doesn't offer easy answers. It encourages you to grapple with these complexities to see how the story of oil is intertwined with the complexities of human nature.
Yeah, we love those gray areas.
Yes, definitely.
So while Rockefeller was building his empire in America, what was happening in the rest of the world?
Oh.
Was anyone else catching on to the potential of oil?
Oh, absolutely. While Standard Oil was becoming a giant in America, a global race for oil was heating up. Yergin takes us to Russia, where the Nobel brothers and the Rothschilds, already powerful figures in other industries, entered the oil game.
Wow.
This wasn't just about profits. It was about national pride and global influence.
Right. I'm guessing this international rivalry pushed everyone to innovate and expand even further, right?
You bet. The quest for oil sparked a wave of technological advancements like pipelines snaking through mountains and massive oil tankers navigating the seas. Remember, this was the late 19th century, so these were truly groundbreaking feats of engineering. And it wasn't just about getting the oil out of the ground, it was about transporting it, refining it, and finding new markets for it.
So we're starting to see a globalized oil market emerge.
Exactly.
It sounds like things were getting pretty intense. So by the turn of the 20th century, was oil starting to have a major impact on the world stage?
Oh, without a doubt. And that's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive.
Oh, can't wait.
We'll explore how oil fueled the rise of the automobile,
Yep.
transforming transportation and society forever. We'll also delve into how oil became a crucial factor in global conflicts, shaping the course of history in ways that are still felt today.
I mean, cars are one thing, but then we're also talking about like World
Sure.
War I, World War II. This is already so fascinating. I can't wait to hear what happens next. For our listeners, make sure to stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive into the prize. We're just getting started.
Yes, definitely. So as we move into the 20th century, you really see how oil wasn't just fueling lamps and stoves anymore.
Right.
It was about to ignite a whole new era.
Yeah, you're talking about the rise of the automobile, right?
Exactly.
That must have been a total game changer for the oil industry.
Oh, absolutely. Yergin really brings this to life. He vividly describes how the invention of the internal combustion engine and then the mass production of cars by Henry Ford, created this insatiable demand for oil.
Wow.
And suddenly the world was on the move and oil was the fuel that made it possible.
Yeah, so we're seeing this shift from kerosene to gasoline as the primary product of the oil industry.
Exactly. And this had massive consequences, not just for the industry itself, but for society as a whole.
Yeah.
Cities were redesigned around cars, suburbs sprawled outwards, and this whole culture of road trips and car ownership emerged. It's hard to overstate the impact of the automobile in the 20th century.
Right.
And oil was at the heart of it all.
Yeah, it's amazing how something like oil could have such a profound impact on the way we live, work, and even socialize.
I know, it's amazing.
But it wasn't just about cars, was it? Didn't oil also start playing a major role in global politics and conflict?
Oh, absolutely. And this is where the prize really starts to read like a geopolitical thriller. Yergin takes us behind the scenes of World War I, where oil-powered warships and the first military airplanes, really demonstrated the strategic importance of this resource.
Right.
Control of oil fields and supply lines became absolutely crucial to military success.
Wow, so we're seeing oil go from being this relatively obscure commodity
Right.
to a vital resource that could determine the fate of nations.
It's crazy, isn't it? And the story gets even more intense during World War II. Yergin reveals how Germany and Japan, both lacking in, sufficient domestic oil resources, launched these aggressive campaigns to secure access to oil fields in other countries. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, for example, was partly motivated by their desperate need to seize control of oil resources in Southeast Asia.
Wow.
Yeah.
So oil was literally fueling the war machines on both sides of the conflict.
Exactly. And Yergin highlights how the Allied powers recognizing the crucial role of oil. They really focused on disrupting enemy supply lines and bombing oil refineries and synthetic fuel plants.
Wow.
Yeah, the control of oil became a matter of survival, and the Allies, with their greater access to resources, ultimately had the upper hand.
It's a stark reminder of how something as seemingly mundane as oil can have such a profound impact on the course of history.
Absolutely. And the story doesn't end there. As the war ended, a new chapter began with the rise of a powerful new force in the oil world, OPEC.
Okay, OPEC. The Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. I know they're a major player today, but how did they come to be so influential?
Well, in the post-war era, there was this growing sense of nationalism in oil-producing countries. They were tired of Western oil companies, dictating terms and reaping most of the profits from their resources. So in 1960, 5 major oil-producing nations, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela, they came together to form OPEC.
So it was essentially a way for these countries to band together and exert more control over their oil.
Exactly. They realized that by coordinating their production and pricing, they could wield significant influence in the global oil market.
Right.
And this newfound power would soon be felt around the world.
You're talking about the oil crises of the 1970s, right?
Yes.
I remember my parents talking about those times, the gas lines, the soaring prices. It must have been a huge wake-up call for the world.
It certainly was. The 1973 oil embargo in particular sent shockwaves through the global economy. Triggered by the Arab-Israeli War, OPEC's Arab members imposed an embargo on oil exports to countries that supported Israel.
Wow.
This led to widespread fuel shortages, rationing, and a surge in prices.
So the world suddenly realized just how dependent it was on oil and how vulnerable it was to disruptions in supply.
Precisely. The 1970s was a decade of reckoning for the oil industry and for the world. It highlighted the risks of relying too heavily on a single energy source, especially one that was subject to geopolitical tensions and instability.
Right. So much for cheap gas.
Yeah.
It sounds like this period was a real turning point, forcing everyone to rethink their relationship with oil. But I'm guessing the story doesn't end there.
You're absolutely right. And as we move into the latter part of the 20th century, we see new challenges emerge. New players enter the game, and the global oil landscape becomes even more complex and interconnected.
Well, I'm on the edge of my seat. Listeners, be sure to join us for the final part of our deep dive into the prize, where we'll unravel twists and turns of the oil industry's journey through the late 20th century and into the 21st. We've journeyed through the wild early days of rock oil, seen the rise of those titans like Rockefeller,
Right.
and even felt those tremors of the 1970s oil crises. Where does this epic tale of oil take us next?
Well, it takes us even deeper into geopolitics.
Okay.
Yergin really masterfully unpacks the complexities of the Suez Crisis in 1956.
Okay.
And, it wasn't just a simple dispute over a canal.
Right.
It was this stark illustration of the West's vulnerability.
In terms of oil.
Yeah, when it came to oil supply.
This was that whole crisis where Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal,
Mhm.
a critical pathway for oil transport.
Exactly.
So oil was really at the heart of this whole conflict.
Oh, absolutely. The canal's nationalization by Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser, really sent shockwaves through Europe, which relied so heavily on oil flowing through that route. Britain, France, and Israel even launched a military intervention,
Wow.
really highlighting how deeply intertwined oil was with global power dynamic.
It sounds like the ultimate high-stakes game of chess,
Oh, yeah,
with all these nations vying for control of this vital resource.
for sure.
Yeah.
And the Suez Crisis really was a turning point. It demonstrated the growing clout of oil-producing nations and their willingness to challenge that established order. It also underscored the strategic importance of the Middle East.
As the world's primary oil source.
Exactly.
So with the Suez Crisis, the balance of power was definitely shifting. But OPEC was already on the scene, right?
Right.
Did they have a role in these crazy events?
Well, while OPEC wasn't directly involved in the Suez Crisis, the event definitely contributed to their growing influence. And remember, OPEC had just been formed a few years earlier in 1960.
Right.
The Suez Crisis really demonstrated the potential power that these oil-producing nations could wield if they acted collectively.
Yeah, it's like they discovered this whole new kind of leverage on the world stage.
Absolutely. And as we move through the 1960s and into the 1970s, OPEC becomes more assertive, really flexing its muscles in the global oil market. This ultimately leads to those oil shocks of the 1970s, which we talked about.
Right.
They really had a profound impact on the global economy.
Those were crazy times. I've heard stories about, long gas lines, soaring prices, a real sense of panic in many countries.
Yeah, it was a real wake-up call for the world. The 1973 oil embargo triggered by the Arab-Israeli War was especially jarring. OPEC's Arab members cut off oil exports to nations supporting Israel, and it just led to widespread fuel shortages and economic turmoil.
It's wild how these crises really exposed how deeply reliant the world had become on oil.
Yeah, for sure. And it forced governments and industries to scramble for solutions. We saw this huge surge in investment in alternative energy sources like nuclear and renewable energy. There was also this renewed push for energy conservation and efficiency. The whole landscape was changing.
So did OPEC maintain this grip on global oil markets after all these crazy events?
Well, OPEC remained a force to be reckoned with, but their influence wasn't absolute.
Okay.
You saw new oil producers like those in the North Sea and Alaska emerge. And then the demand patterns shifted with booming economies like China and India entering the picture as major oil consumers.
So the oil landscape was just becoming even more complex.
Right.
And interconnected with power becoming much more diffused.
Exactly. And the prize does such a fantastic job of illustrating this whole evolution. The latter part of the 20th century and into the 21st century, you really see this multipolar world emerge where oil remains absolutely central, but the control and influence are spread across way more players.
Well, I gotta say, this deep dive has been a real eye-opener. The prize really reveals how oil has shaped not just, economies and technologies,
Right.
but also global power structures.
And even our daily lives.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's more than just a history book. It's really a lens through which to understand, all the forces that have shaped the modern world.
Absolutely.
And if this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, we highly recommend checking out the prize for yourself. You can find an affiliate link to purchase the book in the episode description. It's a wild journey through history that'll really leave you with a much deeper understanding of the world we live in. Until next time, keep exploring.